The American War of Independence 1775 to 1783.
Locate on a map of North America the 13 British colonies in relation to the rest of North America, Britain and the Caribbean. The 13 colonies were a group of settlements that became the original states of the United States of America. Nearly all the colonies were founded by the English. All were located along the east coast of North America. The British had 13 flourishing colonies on the Atlantic coast: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Describe the relationship between Britain and her North American colonies before the outbreak of the American War of Independence. In 1607, English settlers founded Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English settlement in North America. Virginia became a royal colony in 1624. The Puritans, known as the Pilgrims, founded Plymouth, the second English colony in America, in 1620. New Hampshire was settled in 1623, but it did not gain its name until 1629.
For most of the time that the colonies were under British rule, the monarchy allowed them a great deal of freedom. Most of the colonies set up forms of self-government. The colonists also developed their own society and economy.
Relations between Britain and the colonies grew worse after the French and Indian War, 1754–63. The British wanted the colonists to pay taxes to help pay for the war. The colonists did not want to pay taxes without being represented in the British Parliament. These disagreements led to the American Revolution.
Categorize the factors that led to the outbreak of the American War of Independence.
French and Indian War. The French and Indian War took place between the American colonies and New France. Both sides allied with various Native American tribes. This war lasted from 1754 to 1763. British troops not only helped the colonists to fight the war, but were stationed in the colonies for protection after the war. These troops weren't free and Britain needed money to pay for the troops. The British Parliament decided to tax the American colonies to help pay for the troops.
Taxes, laws, and more taxes. Prior to 1764, the British government had pretty much left the colonists alone to govern themselves. In 1764, they began to impose new laws and taxes. They implemented a number of laws including the Sugar Act, Currency Act, Quartering Act, and the Stamp Act. The colonists were not happy with the new taxes. They said they should not have to pay British taxes because they had no representatives in the British Parliament. Their motto became, "No taxation without representation." Many colonists began to protest against these new British taxes and laws. A group called the Sons of Liberty formed in 1765 in Boston and soon spread throughout the colonies. During one protest in Boston, a fight broke out and several colonists were shot and killed. This incident became known as the Boston Massacre. In 1773, the British imposed a new tax on tea. Several patriots in Boston protested this act by boarding ships in Boston Harbor and dumping their tea into the water. This protest became known as the Boston Tea Party.
American Revolution, Intolerable Acts. What were the Intolerable Acts? The Intolerable Acts were 5 laws that were passed by the British Parliament against the American colonies in 1774. How did they get their name? They were given the name Intolerable Acts by the American patriots who felt they simply could not tolerate such unfair laws. Why did Britain impose these new acts? The British passed these acts as punishment for the Boston Tea Party. The 5 acts. Number 1, Boston Port Act. The Boston Port Act was the first intolerable act passed. It was direct punishment to the city of Boston for the Boston Tea Party. The act closed the port of Boston to all ships until the colonists paid for the tea they dumped into the harbor. Many felt that this punishment was unfair because it punished all the citizens of Boston for a crime that only a few committed. Many of the other American colonies sent supplies to Boston. 2. Massachusetts Government Act. This act changed the government of the colony of Massachusetts. It gave more power to the governor, who was appointed by Great Britain, and took away power from the colonists. Many of the government officials that used to be elected by the people would now be appointed by the governor. The act also said that only one town meeting a year could be held. This act angered the entire colony of Massachusetts and put fear into the other American colonies. If the British government would do this to Boston, they may do it to all the colonies. 3. Administration of Justice Act. This act allowed the governor to move capital trials against government officials to Great Britain. The colonists felt this act gave too much protection to government officials. Witnesses would have to travel all the way to Britain to testify against an official, making it nearly impossible to convict. Some colonists called this the Murder Act, as they thought it would allow officials to get away with murder. 4. Quartering Act. The Quartering Act of 1774 expanded upon the original Quartering Act of 1765. It said that the colonies had to provide barracks for British soldiers. In the case where barracks weren't available, the soldiers could be housed in other buildings such as barns, hotels, and homes. 5. The Quebec Act. The Quebec Act expanded the British Canadian territory south into the Ohio Valley. It also made the Quebec province a Catholic province. Although this act wasn't in response to the Boston Tea Party, it was passed at the same time as the rest of the acts. It also angered many American colonists. They were not happy about losing land in Ohio or at having a Catholic province to their north. The results. The Intolerable Acts became a rallying cry for patriots in America. They felt these acts took away some of their basic freedoms. In many ways, these acts helped to unite the colonies and push them one step closer to revolution. Interesting facts about the Intolerable Acts. The meeting of the First Continental Congress was called in response to the Intolerable Acts. They were called the Coercive Acts in Great Britain. They are also sometimes referred to as the Punitive Acts. The British thought the acts would help to maintain control in America, but they had the opposite effect, causing many people to firmly join the side of the rebels.
Growing unity among the colonies. The increased laws punishing the colonies did little to control the colonies as the British had hoped, but actually had the opposite effect. The laws caused the colonies to become more united against the British. Many colonies sent supplies to help Boston during the blockade. Also, more and more colonists throughout the Americas joined up with the Sons of Liberty. First Continental Congress in 1774, 12 of the 13 colonies sent representatives to the First Continental Congress as a direct response to the Intolerable Acts. They sent a petition to King George III to repeal the Intolerable Acts. They never got a response. They also established a boycott of British goods. The war begins in 1775. British soldiers in Massachusetts were ordered to disarm the American rebels and to arrest their leaders. The Revolutionary War began on April 19, 1775, when fighting broke out between the two sides at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The Declaration of Independence. The 13 colonies in the Americas had been at war with Britain for around a year when the Second Continental Congress decided it was time for the colonies to officially declare their independence. This meant that they were breaking away from British rule. They would no longer be a part of the British Empire and would fight for their freedom. On June 11, 1776, the Continental Congress appointed 5 leaders, called the Committee of Five, to write a document explaining why they were declaring their independence. The 5 members were Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and Thomas Jefferson.
July 4, 1776. On July 4, 1776, the Congress officially adopted the final version of the Declaration of Independence. This day is still celebrated in the United States as Independence Day. The Declaration of Independence did more than just say the colonies wanted their freedom. It explained why they wanted their freedom. It listed all the bad things that the king had done to the colonies and that the colonies had rights which they felt they should fight for. Perhaps one of the most famous statements in the history of the United States is in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
The effects of the American War of Independence. In September 1783, the Treaty of Paris ended the war between Britain and the United States. This treaty gave the colonies their independence from Great Britain. The 13 states were free to make their own rules and create their own state and national government without British interference. 2. The British gave America all the land between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mississippi River, and from Canada to the north and Florida to the south. Land that Parliament had reserved for the Indian nations would now be open for settlement. 3. The British Army and Navy agreed to leave all American territories. 4. British Parliament had passes many laws to control trade in the American colonies. These laws were repealed, and American colonists were free to trade with whomever they chose.
The American Revolution and the Caribbean. THW War disrupted long-established trade relations between the 13 British colonies in North America and those in the Caribbean. This caused some slaves in Barbados to die of starvation as planters were deprived of foodstuff from North America. Some of the Loyalist exiles, American colonists who supported the British, found themselves in the Bahamas, Dominica and Jamaica. Some of the exiles were free black Americans who brought the Baptist religion to Jamaica in 1783.